Hey there, welcome to my next lesson about HTML basics. And in this lesson I will be talking about CSS, or cascading style sheets. A very important concept in websites, especially more recently, as CSS is what we use to design the style and look of our page. Very important for designers. And I'm going to show you how to link an external style sheet to our document. So here's our page, what we'd have set up, a very basic page with some content. You've learned all the different types of basic elements we have so far and the image tag and such. But we need to start styling this to make it look a little prettier. But one concept I want to talk about, and you'll hear me talk about my philosophy about things that I've learned over the years too, which hopefully you don't mind learning, but the idea is this is an important view to look at your website in without the CSS to make sure it's meaningful and that nothing's being hidden and that it's very straightforward. In fact, sometimes it's best to design the content of a page this way, and then you can style it later with the content that you have. You should always try to style and design the content. Design, one of the definitions for design is to organize, and I feel like you can only design once you have the content in. That's an important distinction to make, because I think a lot of people start designing before they even know the content, and we want to create designs that inform and best organize the content. In these lessons, they're pretty generic. We're kind of just going for things willy-nilly, and I haven't come up with any Photoshop designs yet. We're just kind of adding things in and changing them as we go. So anyway, we'll go back to our HTML document, and I'm going to show you how to add it in an external style sheet. There's several ways to add styles in, but I'm going to start out with the way I do it, the best way to do it, and then I can insert in the other ways to do it as we go, just not to overwhelm you. I'm kind of hitting the most important things and not trying to be exhaustive about each topic. I just want to get you started making websites as quick as possible. So we're going to go back to our head of the document and put another element in here, another tag that will be important, and this is the link tag. And the link tag is a self-closing tag. That is, it doesn't need a closing tag to it, and it contains a couple attributes that you'll need to do. And for style sheets, these three attributes are needed each time. One is rel, and the rel for style sheets is style sheet. The next is type, and the type for CSS is text/CSS. There's a bunch of different types you can put in for different types of files you might be linking to, but in this case, text.css is what you need. And finally, one that you're somewhat familiar with is href, and that is the source of where the file will be. And another note about attributes is attributes can be in any order. This could be up front here, as long as it has the space in between it. That's fine. I'm going to save this, and now I'm going to go create our other CSS file that we'll be linking to before I put that in there. So let me go do that. I'm going to go back to our folder, and we have our index and about and images pages from images folder from before. I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call it styles. We could very well put our styles right in the root directory, and this depends on how you want to organize it. I tend to like to have my root directory very sparse, and in fact, if we get more pages, I might put that in its own directory too. So just follow with me, and this is a good way to practice some of our directory paths and things like that. So I'm going to open up the styles and put a new text document in there, just like we did in the very beginning, creating our HTML document. But this time, I'm going to call it main.css, and the main can be any word you want. The .css is required. You could call it styles or anything like that, styles.css. But I call it main because this is the main default CSS file I'll be using for my document. I may add some more specific styles later on, in which I can put in here. However, it is good to have as few CSS files as possible, and I'll talk about that later, or I should say as few HTTP requests as possible. We'll talk about that soon enough. So this one's called main.css, and it's going to be a blank document when I open it up here in Notepad++. But to link it back, if you remember our directory paths, you just have to go into the new folder, which was styles, and then call it what the file name is, main.css. And I think I mentioned before how I like to use this /donation saying I'm starting in the root directory or the current directory that this file is in, this HTML index.html file, and then moving into the styles folder and then picking out my main.css. And this should work. And then I'm going to go back to my page and refresh it, and nothing's going to change because I haven't added any rules yet. So let me come up with the first rule. We'll go back to Notepad++, go into our main.css and set up our first rule. And a rule is just each rule that styles an element. So I'm going to do one of the more basic ones. And what we're going to have first is our selector. And I'm going to name the element that I want to make the rule for. And this is the syntax for it. You use one of these open curly brackets, and then you use one of these closing curly brackets. And I like to style it like that. And so this is saying that the body tag, all of these declarations inside of here will apply to the body tag. And this is something you'll get very used to. As a designer, you're going to be writing hundreds of rules in your CSS file probably. So the first one I'm going to talk about is, then there's several I'll be talking about. This will be a longer tutorial because we want to get you started with quite a few. And there are hundreds, but we'll just talk about a few. Is background color. And it has to be spelled this exact way. So this is your property. So the property is the background color. And then we put a colon. And then we put the value that we want it to be. And I'm going to put red just as an example now. So we're selecting the body with the selector. And we're declaring in our declaration here the property and the value. And this is the basic setup for every CSS rule. And there's some different types of syntax we'll get into that are more advanced as we move on. But I'm going to save this and move back to my document and refresh. And you'll see that the whole body, the body being everything in the viewport here, is red. So not the most pleasant design choice, but it definitely shows an example of what we're doing. And sometimes that's the best way to do examples, is to be kind of garish so that you know to change it and nobody's confused that you are making a mistake. It's a test to make sure it's working. So we'll see that that's working. Let's just choose a little more pleasant color. And I'm going to show you how to do hex colors. And you can type red, blue, tan, yellow in here. I tend to like to choose hex colors or RGBA colors, and I'll just do a hex for now just to show you that. And those are 6 numbers, hex meaning 6, and 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 is black. So we'll save that, go back to our document, and we'll see it's black. Of course that does us no good because our text is black too, but I wanted to show you that. And 0 meaning no, the pixels are off being black. Each pixel is off. These two represent R, red, these two represent G, B, and these two represent, or G, and these two represent G, and these two represent B. That might sound confusing at first, and if it is, please just don't get hung up on that. You can always just type in black to be simple for now. But these are colors you can pull from Photoshop, which I will show you later, and we'll talk about more. So for red, again, we have a red and green and blue, and you'll see that this will go back to red because our value for red is F, which is all the way turned on 255% degrees on, not percent, points on, levels on, and the rest are black. And we could do the same with green. Or we could do any number of that. Oh, and by the way, there has to be a semicolon at the end of each one as well. So there's lots of different things you can play around with text. Let's just put gray in here and make that gray, just so we have something to work with. And that is one element we can work with, the body tag. So you'll see that when you're working with one of your, let's go back to index.html, one of your tags, existing tags, you just type that right in to your CSS file, just as so. But I would like to show you how to declare a div. We choose which element we want to affect in style. In this case, I'm going to pick this div here. You can pick it any one, and we're going to kind of give it a name. I'm going to give it a class. And follow with me. This is just the syntax you follow. It's something you have to get used to. And so it's just a space. And just as an attribute is in there, you can put a class anywhere inside of this beginning tag element. And this class is going to be called cat image for now. Nothing very profound. So this is the syntax you follow. You don't have to put the hyphen there. You can do something like that, but just to make it a little more readable, I'm putting a hyphen. I tend to do all lowercase. There cannot be any spaces. You cannot start it with a number. So that's what I'm going to name that div. It makes it a little more meaningful for me especially, and a little bit more meaningful depending on what it is for the browsers too. But it's especially useful when we go back into our main CSS file so that I can target it. And the way I target it is with the dot. I target a class with a dot. And I put the same name as I called it in the class inside of the quotation mark. So it's dot, no spaces, but then cat image. And this is very important. Then we have this part ends up being the same as before. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you another declaration here. Another selector is width, or another property is width. And I'm going to say 600 pixels perhaps here. And so that's how you write a width in pixels, 600 pixels with the px, again the semicolon. I'm going to hit enter. To keep it organized, I hit return. I could put it in a line like this. But for organization for now, I'm going to just put it, enter underneath it. So the cat image is going to have a width and height of 600 and 400 pixels each, but I am also going to give this a background color of yellow. And that will let us see what it's going to do. Let's go back to our image here, or to our document, and hit return. And you can see I made that container, that div called cat image, that's bigger than the image itself that's contained in, yellow, and it's behind there. And the image wants to, by default, go to the upper left of that container. So this is an important concept to understand, these containers, because this is how we'll start laying out our page with these boxes. It's called the box model, and everything's in boxes, even if it's a circle, as we'll talk about later. But these boxes, you can see it doesn't fill the page, and it's only 600 pixels wide, where our browser is several pixels more than that wide. So that's an important concept to start understanding. So going back to our index, I'm going to explain this again. We have our div that was surrounding the image, the anchor link that's inside of that surrounding the image, and then the image inside of that that has its width and height declared there. And you'll see that same thing here. This one is the A tag that has the hand. Once we move out of the image, it turns back into a pointer, and the rest of that div, that cat image div, and that class there, and that class there. And these should be indented as well for organization. So one thing we could have either a class or a ID. An ID, the difference between the two is an ID is very specific for that page. In fact, you can only have one. So you type ID there, and instead of a dot or a period, you put a pound symbol. And that will, right now, will be the same thing. If you go to our page and refresh, it'll be the same thing. But the difference you need to note is that this one is specific in that there can only be one per page. So you have to be careful. There should be probably more classes than IDs. IDs are very specific, and we'll be getting into what the cascading style sheets means, and how things have priority over each other, and things can override each other. So an ID is important to start learning how those can be more specific rules set up. But for right now, this is fine. It's not going to matter. When you're playing around, just make note that the ID is a pound and class is a dot. And you can have several classes, as many as you want, on a page. So I'm thinking we're going to have a lot of cat images on our page, so I'm going to change that back to pound. And I'll leave this ID for now just to go back and show that now this rule won't apply. If I go back to here and change that back to class, it will work. Alright, so we have some more items being changed and styled, although not very nicely designed, but for example, these will work. Let's see, what other part can we work on? We could work on this H1 tag. If you remember, the welcome to our web page was in an H1. So you probably have already guessed that if you go back to your CSS and type H1 here with our brackets in between, always have the brackets, and because it's H1 is the name of the tag, you don't have to have a dot or a pound sign before it, just the H1. And in that, I'm going to teach you another declaration, another property of font family. And in this case, I'm going to do times New Roman, one of the default ones. And we'll talk a lot about fonts. What happens here, so this is your declaration. We have our colon, and then we have our value. And our value, we have two values in here separated by commas, and this is the way the font family works. We can pick a specific font family, and this is one that will most likely be on all systems, Mac or PC or Linux. It's guaranteed to be on there. And then what it says with this comma and the serif is that if it cannot find this font family, then default to whatever serif font is on their machine. And likewise, we can put sans serif in there as well. But because Times New Roman is a serif font, we will use serif because we wanted to get it as close as possible. And later on, I'll show you how to use more specific typefaces. In fact, we'll use web typefaces that you can get pretty fancy with and do anything you want. But this is how the font family works. And just in order to do one thing at a time, let's save that and see what happens. And I believe it's already Times New Roman, so it's not going to change anything. I wanted to show you a couple more. We could show you Ariel, which is another common one, and change this to sans serif. And now you will actually see a change. See, so now it's a sans serif Ariel. Let's show you some more properties right away. Color is, what that means is font color. So this will be the font color of the page. And let's do a hex value of white. And for things like this where there's all 6 are the same, you can shorthand it to 3. because this one covers R, this one covers G, and that one covers B. So it's a shorthand. Let's save it and go back to here, and you'll see that it is now white. I'll show you a few more. Let's do size. So this is affecting all H1 tags, remember. And let's make it quite a bit bigger, 32 pixels. So we have to define what kind of font size we're using. And I'm going to show you pixels for now, not to overwhelm you with all the other types. We'll get into those later. But font size, 32 pixels, and you'll notice a increase. Or not, because it's not big enough. Let's do 64 so we notice that. There we go. Now we notice a big 1994 style web page here with that. And then likewise you can do the same with H2, but let's say we want the same rule to be applied to our H1 and H2. Maybe not. Well, let's do different. Let's do let's set up one for H2. Font, or let's just change the color for now, and let's make the color yellow. Well, let's make it orange. And so, like you'd expect, if we go back to here, the H2 will be orange. But the next thing I want to show you is how to select multiple selectors elements here. And if you remember, we had, well, we don't have our P tag anymore. Let's add that back in, or let's do our list item here. We're going to style this as well. So back in here, I'm going to type in LI because that's another element that doesn't need a dot or a pound before it because it's just the name of the element. See, LI. And then let's go back to our web page and refresh, and you'll notice this turned orange, and these dots turned orange, but this one did not turn orange. And if you haven't guessed yet, the reason why is because this one is an A anchor tag and this one is not. So this one turned orange and this one did not, because anchor tags have a higher priority over these items. So in order to change that, let's go back to our main.css and let's set up a rule for anchor. And for that one, we'll set up a color of, let's just pick a light blue, just to see the difference here. And there it's light blue. And the idea with anchor tags, and we're going to talk a little bit about usability here and user experiences, you want to keep your anchor tag kind of consistent across your site. You want the visitor to know that here is a link. And blue is the traditional color, although the default blue is kind of garish sometimes depending on what you're trying to do. It is the best blue according to Google's studies, but you have to do something that fits in with your design. So whatever that happens to be. But this is a way to make all anchor links, unless you override it with a more specific tag, to be all anchors, all links will be light blue in here. So you can see our beautiful site is coming together. So we've talked about quite a bit of things today. We have several different properties to play with. We know how to link in our head to the document. And once you get this done once, you can copy and paste it in every document you have. Oh, speaking of that, we also want to make sure we keep that consistent with our About page. Let me show you what happens when we go to our About page. You'll see none of the stylings there. So let's go back and try this again. That is because the About page does not have the link to the CSS file. So let's paste that in there, save it, and then go back to the About page, and we'll see that it's the same. So that's something you're going to want to keep consistent for all your pages, is that CSS file in the head. So we learned about linking up to our CSS file, and we learned several different rules. We learned about classes and IDs and how to correspond them with the dot or the pound. We learned about just the elements themselves. They can be this way, how to affect all elements on the page. We talked a little bit about specificity and how to select several elements with the comma between the property and the value, and the different syntax with the colon in between the property and value, and closing it out with a semicolon. So I hope this was very valuable for you. We talked about a lot of things, so if you have any questions, just put them in the comments, and we'll get more into CSS in the next lesson. We'll get a little more detailed. Thank you.